All right. I think we are about. Let's pull up the screen here. See if we're live. If you can see me. Oh, I can hear my volume going. There we go. We'll go ahead and get started here in a minute. Live. All right. Thank you all. Boy, I seem to be getting the hang of this here as we I say that as I shake the camera. As get a couple of these under my belt, and we since it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the internet connection failed us, and I got disconnected. So since then, we have hardwired me in. I'm Ethernet cabled into our internet, so I don't think we'll have issues at least on that end. And I'm getting the hang of the software a little bit better, despite myself. And we will see how this goes. Boy, there's already a lot of comments here. Shirt says number one what? The shirt says Ichiban Moto. If you all are familiar with, if anybody knows who Ichiban Moto is, sing out in the comments. But if not, he used to, I don't know if he's put out any videos in a long time. He used to be a YouTube channel who made hilarious videos making fun of custom motorcycles. he was building a cafe racer using, and he would cut metal it with like the scissors on your Swiss Army knife. So obviously he wasn't actually cutting them that way, but it made it look like it. And he had special zip ties, but the colors of the zip ties determined how strong they were. So if you haven't and you want to waste some time, go look up Ichiban Moto on YouTube. It's worth a laugh. Absolutely. I think he's from Chicago area, something like that. I'd love to meet him someday. Actually, today in the coffee shop, somebody stopped me and they go, "You're wearing an Ichiban Moto shirt. How obscure is that?" I was like, I didn't know anybody else knew what Ichiban Moto was, so at least in Goshen. All right. It's kind of muggy in the shop today. It's really hot. A lot of chit-chat there to start with, but hello and welcome to today. This is going to be episode 9 of the Janus Motorcycles Ramblestream with me, Richard Worsham, founder and designer here at Janus. Welcome everyone. As always, if you're having something to drink, let us know what it is. I'm drinking only the finest PBR, or as they say in Milwaukee, Pabst. I was corrected by a waitress, an old waitress in Milwaukee when I tried to order PBR. Only the finest. All right. Well, tell me what you are drinking. If you're drinking water, that's great too. A little weak sauce, but we all do our own thing. All right. So let's look at some comments here. One of these days, I need to move the comment screen onto the main screen. Can I do that? Then I would be looking at the camera more. I'll work on it. Multifarious. Hello. Thanks for letting me know I'm live. Confed Yank. We got a bunch of folks that I recognize here. Howdy from North Carolina. Hello. How's it going? Schrader Boys TV. Got a thumbs up from them. Shirt says number one what? I don't know my Japanese. So Ichiban is number one in Japanese. Ichiban, number one moto. That must be what it is. There we go. Learn something every day. Eric Fritz says, "Hey all." Charles McGahagan. Hey everyone. Hey Charles. Always good to see you. Multifarious. Confed Yank. I don't recall him, but probably look it up. Yes, you should look up Ichiban Moto. He's great. Andy. Hello from West Michigan. Hey Andy. How are you? Always good to see you. Well, it looks like it's Ichiban Moto Rad in kanji. Oh, that probably is exactly what it is. Howdy from North Carolina. I'll try not to ramble about typesets, bookbinding, and such. No, you should. Ramble on as much as you want. I really, obviously, since last week, you all know I love printing, traditional handset printing, and have a little bit of knowledge of binding, paper making, and all that stuff. One day we should actually, that'd be fun, do an actual Ramblestream about, like, actually with a printing press. I've got quite a few. Or, well, I have one. My wife has several. So, Coke Food Lion brand because I'm broke. Nice. Gertz Miller is drinking a root beer float. That's not bad at all. I could do one of those. Seth says, don't drink. Good evening, Chief. Good evening, Seth. Sometimes during the year, I don't drink either. I fast from alcohol a couple of times a year. But I respect everybody's drinking preferences. Jim Winters said his greeting from Indiana Dunes. Jim, remind me, were you at the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride with us? I'm wondering if I've got the name wrong. And were you riding a Triumph? I'm not sure. Tell me about that. Jim, okay, you were. Okay. All right, great. I'm glad to connect everything there. Because I don't think I actually recognized you at the DGR. I apologize, but I will next time. Confed Yank says, I do want to do bookbinding as a hobby. Yeah. My wife's done quite a bit of really neat, mostly small books, but a lot of experience with that in college and and professionally. She's done some. The biggest book I think the one I had the most fun with was just an accordion, folding it up, an accordion book that I printed. That was fun to get the printing to come out right. But Jim Winters, you were running a Thruxton. Cool. Well, anybody else in the chat or on the video watching? Let's see how many people we have. Can I tell how many people we have? I'll pull it up here. Maybe I can't tell. I can't tell. I don't know how to work that stuff. Well, anyway, if you're watching, please comment. This is all about interaction, or at least I try to make it that way. So if I miss your question, let me know. Wave your hand or something in there. Put some emojis or whatever, and I have noticed in the past that I will sometimes just skip a comment accidentally. So let me know. Love to hear from each and every one of you all on here. There's a lot, but I don't think it's that many that we can't talk about each question. Okay. Before we go any further, I've got a good poem for us. Again this evening, I don't have design work to do, so we're going to kind of ramble a little bit. And I figured, you can see up on the screen, I figured we'd maybe talk a little bit about watches, which is something that I'm not even slightly an expert on, but I've been learning more about them. And I think I'll probably be revisiting this topic more as I do learn more and as we talk more about Janus and what we do. But if there's anyone who's watching who does know about watches or timepieces or horology, as they say, pipe up. Let me know what you think. Correct me if I'm wrong on anything, but I'm going to talk a little bit about timepieces and the role that they play and some of the similarities with what we do here at Janus Motorcycles and some of the thinking that I've been doing lately about that. So we'll dig into that in a minute. Seth says, I've spent tens of thousands on watches. Be careful. Okay, so Seth, you will be the expert this evening, and I'd love to ping some ideas off you. If anyone else has watches, I have not spent tens of thousands on watches. I actually, we'll get there. I'm kind of a budget enthusiast at this point, very, very fresh to the idea of it. But what got me interested, as we'll talk about, is what we're doing here at Janus. So before we do that, I thought we would, as always, read a little poem. This one is by, and we're going to get real old school here. This is by, some people will laugh, and other people will be really love it. I did, in my undergrad, we did, everybody would, if you were a literature major, that is, you would choose a poet to do a junior project on, which meant that you basically were required to read everything they ever wrote, whether it was prose or poetry. And for some weird reason, I decided to pick the sort of romantic, Victorian William Wordsworth. Tells you a little bit about me, maybe, I suppose. They wouldn't let me do Coleridge. Anyway, this is a great one, not too long, like some of his stuff is, called Yew Trees. And it's a great poem. I think about rambling, the kind of writing that we promote here at Janus, that, wandering around and finding a spot like this with a tree like this. Actually, I was walking and found a tree, probably not as old as the one that he's talking about here in this poem, but recently, and it kind of struck me as like finding these things, you just kind of stumble into them and you're, wow, this is really, really old, and it's probably got a really incredible story. Anyway, we'll dig into it. Yew trees. There is a yew tree, pride of Lorton Vale, which to this day stands single in the midst of its own darkness, as it stood of yore, not loath to furnish weapons for the bands of Umfraville or Percy, ere they marched to Scotland's heaths, or those that crossed the sea and drew their sounding bows at Azincourt, perhaps at earlier Cressy or Poitiers. Of vast circumference and gloom profound, this solitary tree, a living thing produced too slowly ever to decay, of form and aspect too magnificent to be destroyed. But worthier still of note are those fraternal four of Borrowdale, joined in one solemn and capacious grove, huge trunks, and each particular trunk a growth of intertwisted fibers serpentine, upcoiling and inveterately convolved, nor uninformed with fantasy and looks that threaten the profane, a pillared shade upon whose grassless floor of red-brown hue, by sheddings from the pining umbrage tinged perennially, beneath whose sable roof of boughs, as if for festal purpose decked with unrejoicing berries, ghostly shapes may meet at noontide, fear and trembling, hope, silence and foresight, death the skeleton and time the shadow, there to celebrate, as in a natural temple scattered o'er with altars undisturbed of mossy stone, united worship, or in mute repose to lie, and listen to the mountain flood, murmuring from Glaramara's inmost caves. I was looking very quickly for a poem, and it mentions time, so I thought that would be a good one. Kind of the scarier side of time. Yeah, okay. Well, let's see if we got any more comments while I was reading that. Confed Yank says, that's the struggle I'm trying to figure out is the printing. Main poems about motorcycles, books, LOL. Mainly or something? Yeah, I think that's what you're saying. That would be really neat if you did print books on motorcycles and poetry on motorcycles. You got my business. Schrader Boys TV says, love the shop tour videos. Thank you very much. This is not one of those videos. I hope you understand, but we do them a lot. We will be doing a shop tour this coming Friday because we didn't do one last Friday. We do them every other week. So we'll do another one. Maybe this time we'll do one down at TT. We kind of do it by the seat of our pants. But yeah, I'm not mobile here. This is a camera mounted on my computer, so I just talk. This is like C-SPAN of motorcycles, the boring stuff. Seth Mark says, oh yeah, you've spent tens of thousands on watches. Be careful. Yeah, I do. Well, I don't have much risk right now of spending tens of thousands because I don't have them. But if I ever did, I can think of worse things to do than to be interested in watches. Especially if you really are interested in the in the study of them, and like I think I could be. Anyway, Confed Yank says, I only spent hundreds on watches. I prefer a pocket. That's awesome. Me too. I have actually recently been looking at some of those, what are they called, dollar pocket watches at the pawn shop. You can get them for like $15. They're really cool. And then there are some family pieces in my family that are pretty neat pocket watches. Confed Yank says, I will dare to say it, sir. You seem quite romantic to select such poem, but in pure form of that in etymology of it. Yes, exactly. Well, I did study romantic poets for my undergrad. A lot of Coleridge and Wordsworth, and all the gang. Whether or not they're the best poets, but Wordsworth he bears more study than I think we give him credit for now. People kind of think he's a little bit hokey or too Victorian, but pretty good stuff. Seth Mark says, you have no idea. Mechanical watches are the pinnacle of machine as soulcraft. Okay, I think we need to start talking about this. So let's dig in. So, watches. I'm gonna do, and Seth, you since you know much more about and probably than I do, dig in and correct me absolutely if you're wrong. But the basic thing about watches, the basic, let's do the history first. So when I was quite young, I think my parents gave me a book called Longitude by, I'm gonna forget his name, David Sobel. Yeah, I don't know. Look it up. It's just a book called Longitude, and it's about the history of this guy named John Harrison, who was an English, I guess you'd really call him a clockmaker, because he didn't really, the things he was making at that point were much larger. But he actually started off making wooden clocks for like churches and stuff. Like we're talking very large scale time-keeping devices that would keep time. And then I'm really shortening this story, but there was a competition. Well, basically at the same time, navigation was, the English especially were exploring all over the place. I guess not just the English, but the Spanish, and everybody was exploring all over the place, and they were able to tell their latitude using solar and celestial navigation. So you can use a sextant, and you can determine based on the height of certain, celestial bodies exactly where you are with latitude. So latitude would be the lines that go horizontally. So the equator, and then you have all the other lines, and they could be very accurate in determining where they were in their latitude, but they did not have the ability to determine their longitude precisely. And it would take the advent of the accuracy in timekeeping to be able to do that, because what they would do is if they could maintain an understanding of what the time at their home port was, which for the English would have been Greenwich, so Greenwich Mean Time. If they knew what time it was there, and then they could tell what the highest that the sun was at noon, or at noon at their exact location, then they could determine their longitude, which would be how far east and west they were. And so I forget what the body was, but there was they basically had a prize for who could solve the question of how to keep time well enough to, and I forget the exact standards that they set for it, but it's a long story. He made a number of timepieces that used variations of pendulum, and not because you're on a boat. It's like the most difficult way. You can have a clock that uses a pendulum in a fixed position, but a boat is moving. It's literally never not moving. So they had to figure out a way that it would keep time. And even prior to this, there had been small watches or timepieces. They would have been more like orbs in the Renaissance, the late Renaissance. They started having these little timepieces, and my understanding is that the earliest timepieces did not have an escapement like a modern timepiece, so they were not regulated. They would just kind of like a spring unwinding. So they really didn't keep very good time. But they, right from the very beginning, they took on this sort of I don't want to just reduce it to status symbol. They were something that people valued because they were so fascinating, and it was this endeavor, this human engineering and ingenuity in creating this little tiny machine that could keep time. And I think that was something that's beyond. I mean, certainly it was a way to display your wealth, but I think there was something more going on there, and I think there still is. Early on when I as a child, you see somebody with a Rolex, and you're like, oh, come on, this is like, it's like just a status symbol. And as I've learned more about watches and the time and all that kind of thing, I think I have more of an understanding of that. Not necessarily of needing a Rolex, but not scorning one if you have the money to spend on it. My first foray now into timepieces is this. Let's see if you can see it here. It's a Seiko 5. This would be called what would be called a field watch. I've had a number of watches before this. I've always been interested in them, but I was given a Fossil watch when I graduated, which I still have, and it still runs. I've kept it working. A quartz watch, and then I've had a number of other Timex, Weekender, which is a great watch. Still works. Doesn't keep great time anymore. It's been dunked underwater too many times, and it doesn't hold water anymore. But the Indiglo barely lights up. And then recently, as I've been getting into this and studying timepieces and watches, that's when I decided, hey, I think I want to get a real automatic mechanical watch that I can just play around with. And this one's not the most accurate thing in the world. I lose probably 15 seconds a day on it, which I think they can do better than that, but whatever. It's really fun. I've been having a blast with it, and they're very affordable. They're not that expensive. But let me just show you all real quick here what I've been talking about. So the earliest watches would have looked like this. And then this thing is not small. Here it is from the side, right over here. Probably could have been kept in a very large pocket, but it was portable. You could carry this thing around, and it doesn't have any glass. It just has a kind of grill over the front of it. That and same with this one. If you can see these, I gotta hold them in front of the camera. Basically, it's like a grill that you can see the face behind. This is, by the way, a really wonderful book I purchased this spring called The History of Watches by David Thompson. And the photographs are beautiful. I can't show you everything because it's not going to come through there, but it's a wonderful collection of watches, and it really goes through primarily watches pre-1900. Most of them are older pocket watches, which is really the vast majority of the history of timekeeping is really before 1900. I mean, so much has happened since then in the history, but just like everything else, technology has advanced so quickly in the last 100 years. But there's a lot of fantastic older pocket watches, and then you can also study like the different kinds of escapements and how they've changed. So all this to say, let's keep moving along here. About 1900, there was no such thing as a wristwatch like this. I believe that there were some watches that ladies would tie on like a little string. They were available for for women on their wrist because maybe they didn't have the pocket for the pocket watch or whatever. But men would carry a pocket watch. And sometime around the period of World War I, they had these horrible, they would, in the no man's land between the trench warfare, and they would mount these attacks all along these trenches, and then they would run across the no man's land. And you've all read the history, seen the movies, very devastating form of warfare. But in order to time those attacks, they needed a way to keep time, and they needed something that they could be holding a weapon while doing it. And so they started brazing lugs like you have on your watch onto their pocket watches. And that's one version of the story of how the watch was really born. And then gradually over the course of the next few decades, it was formalized into a really what we now know as the watch. And so few people today actually carry a pocket watch anymore. I think it's really neat that folks that do. And I think it's really neat. I think, would you say, Confetti Yank, that you can prefer a pocket watch? That's really neat. So then where it gets interesting for Janus, and why I'm bringing this all up, is that in the 1960s, mid-60s, I don't know my history of watches that well yet. I'm learning. There was this thing called the quartz crisis. And what happened with the quartz crisis is that both the Swiss and the Japanese simultaneously were kind of racing to figure out how to make an electrically powered watch using this quartz. I don't even know how it works. I'm learning that part. But basically, the quartz watch would be able to keep time without all the gears and wheels and escapements and all that stuff that the mechanical watches required. By this time, of course, you didn't just have to wind your watch. There are many watches like this one, which is an automatic, that you just, by shaking your wrist, there's a weight in the back that it automatically winds itself. But the benefit of these quartz watches was that they were able to keep much more accurate time. So they physically were out competing the automatics. And a lot of watches, really, lots of watch manufacturers, especially in Switzerland, where watches have, in the last 150 years, really become. It used to be London. London was the center of watchmaking, but I think even some of the Swiss brands, early like French brands, Breguet, they would pretend that they would put London on the watch because it was like modern. It's like a Chinese watch now or a knockoff watch putting made in Swiss made on the front. It's just a kind of a sad excuse to claim that you're made in this place where they're supposed to be made. But by the 1960s and 70s, the Swiss watch was the dominant, and as it still is, the dominant. Really, it's like a single valley in Switzerland where all the really preeminent watchmakers have their manufacturing facilities. Anyway, it's called the quartz crisis because it made these manufacturers reevaluate everything. And I think some of them went out of business. It was extremely challenging. However, what they ended up doing was kind of redefining what a watch was because of this. Because you could have a quartz watch that kept, we're talking, it's not just marginally better, they're considerably better. My cheap little Timex Weekender, for example, can hold time over a month better than this one can for a week. And this is, 4 times as expensive. Still, this is like a $200 watch, if that. You can get them cheaper. And a Weekender you can get for $50. So the Weekender is the quartz watch. The Timex is the Seiko. The Timex Weekender is $50. The Seiko is like $200. At least the Seiko Sports, the 5, like this one is. Anyway, they they were just way better in terms of function. So what happened was that the automatic mechanical watchmakers figured out that they needed to appeal to something different than just function. And I'm not sure I can put my finger exactly on it. I think there are many other people that do a better job explaining it, but essentially there's something about a mechanical watch that a quartz watch can never achieve. Whether it's the longevity, the fact that they can be a well-made watch will last, if serviced, indefinitely. It's an heirloom. It's something that you can pass on to your children. It's something that it's even beyond that. It's a little thing. Like when you open up that automatic watch, or if it has like this one, it has what's called a display back. You can see it here. But on the back, like here's the front. On the back, it has this, and you can watch the wheel move. Let's see. There, see, it just fell. It's rotating in there. So you can actually look in there and see the escapement, and I don't know. There's something about it that's absolutely fascinating, and people are fascinated by it. They're beautiful. It's like you have this little, I don't know. They have character. It's like a Janus. When I started learning about this, it made so much sense to me because there are so many things, I believe, that are more practical than a motorcycle, that work better for getting you from one place to another. Whether it's a Dodge Neon or I don't know, what other horrendously boring car can we think of? A Corolla, Toyota Corolla. You know, it's still probably more practical than your BMW, even your new BMW. not just even an Airhead, old, R90 or something like that. It's a choice you make because it brings you another kind of value which cannot be described in purely functional form. So I'm gonna pause and we're gonna go over and look here at the comments. Keep this a two-way conversation. Jeep Man Dan says, heading out on Halcyon 450 number 121 with Andy on number 120 on another ride. Happy 4th, everyone. Yes, indeed. Red, white, and blue. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I am actually, after this, I'm taking my oldest to a demolition derby south of town. We have New Paris is it's actually where our machine shop is, 5 miles south of Goshen, and they have a awesome the New Paris Speedway, and they do figure 8 racing. So they're going to be doing some figure 8 racing tonight. We're going to see some cars get smashed. It's going to be great. Speaking of Corollas. Okay. Confed Yank says, I know there's wood clock kits you can get now. Yes, I've seen some of those, and they look really, really cool. Jacob Will says, afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, Jacob. Good to see you here. Welcome. Tell us what you're drinking. Jet Black says, Ichiban Moto shock rebuild is a must-see. Yes, definitely check out Ichiban Moto's stuff. They're great. How to make things using pieces of wood. Jacob Will says, I have a 1920s Lux rotary clock that still keeps great time. It's very fun to watch work. I don't even know what that is. What is a rotary clock? Tell us. Tell us more. Seth Mark says, the joy of the watch is its micro-mechanical art. Interesting. Complications are the highest level of machine. Okay, I think you're onto something there. I do think that may be true. So what Seth says when he says complication is that, and I think that's a great term, a complication, so that the basic watch keeps track of, maybe even it's just hours and minutes. and not seconds. I think on a watch like this where the second hand is coming from the middle, that wouldn't be counted as a complication. Some watches, though, actually this watch has a complication. If you look, I don't know if you can see it. If I can't make it focus. I don't know if you can see that. But up here, there's a date time window. And basically, it's just a little window and it says Monday 2. So you all are familiar with this. That is technically not just technically, that is a complication. And so it's something that makes it more complicated. And it's almost like the watchmakers have these complications, in many cases, simply as an opportunity to add complications to their designs. And especially when you get into like the high art, like the expensive watches, some of the complications are incredible. There are automatic watches. Well, the perpetual, like they can, you don't need to reset the date. They keep it for like a certain amount of time. So like it knows what's coming next for the next month. Really wild stuff. And then, I mean, moon phases, tide changes. Then they have, of course, the chronometers where you can keep time. There are watches that have alarms, mechanical alarms, or not just an alarms, but like chimes. It's incredible. And yes, the complication, it's exactly like I said. It's like the watchmakers are it's like the complication is an opportunity to display their craft even more. And in I think, Seth, you're really onto something there when you say it is the highest level of machine. If it's not the highest, it's up there. I think the motorcycle, a really nice motorcycle, can do something similar, and that's why that's why we're talking about watches right now, because I think there's something connecting them. The fact that they do not necessarily make practical sense, but they perform a function, or they do something that gives us purpose, or that has a purpose. Maybe we'll dig into that more. Let's see. Confed Yank says, in fairness, watch pockets did shrink in time. Yes, they did. They would also give orders over radios for the first time in World War II to multiple of companies. So having watches was very important. Interesting. That's really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Seth says, pretty much all quartz and now digital watches keep flawless time. Yes, a $9 watch from Walmart is nearly perfect at keeping time. Exactly. I think that you're absolutely right. Like, I actually just bought a Casio. It's the Mission Impossible, the one that Tom Cruise wears. And I did it because I'm not going to be a snob about. I'm just interested. I've got this, and I'm like, okay, well, I want to see what I don't think have I ever had a digital watch? I've never been interested in digital watches. I always like the look of a field watch. There's something about how practical it is that appealed to me. But I'm kind of looking for it. I think it comes in tomorrow, actually. So maybe I'll show it to you next week. But it's just a kind of a neat thing. And there's some really neat, very inexpensive. I mean, you can get a Casio that went to outer space. It's like approved by NASA for less than $50. And then this thing, you have to. I reset this every morning, and it costs 8 times that, or 4 times that. But this has so much more meaning. Anyway, keep going. Seth says, tuning a mechanical to COSC. So COSC is it's a Swiss certification of accuracy, is a huge hill to climb. Yeah, so COSC is a certification that basically stipulates that whatever is COSC certified has to, I don't know what the specs are, but it has to keep time. It has to be very well regulated. Now you can get these Seiko, even this little cheap Seiko here. You can have it regulated, or I've actually been thinking about doing it, is learning enough about it to be able to open it up and actually try regulating it myself. Now, you really need some much more specialty equipment than I have to do that, but there are ways of doing it. I'm kind of afraid to damage the waterproofness of it, so I'm not ready to do that yet, but I'm sure at some point I won't be able to not tinker with it. But you can tune some of these watches to be more accurate, let's just say. But still, it's never going to compete with the digital or the quartz watch. So there we go. Confed Yank says Honda Civic. Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, I'm not knocking cheap cars or cheap watches. And maybe that's what I'm getting at with this, is that this is not something that has to necessarily be exorbitantly expensive. And I'm cautious to say that because some people would say that our motorcycles are ludicrously expensive. But I think those same people wouldn't understand necessarily why a $9 watch isn't better than a $200 watch. Does that make sense? Like, that's exactly our argument with Janus, is we're building something that has a soul and that's a piece of art, and that, well, it works too, but it takes involvement and engagement, and maybe you need to wind it up a little bit, and you need to, but it's something that you are fascinated by and that provides endless, perpetual enjoyment and reward. Now I'm rambling. I forgot where I went. Jim Winters says, an appliance to move it. Man, you guys are awesome. Yes, you are absolutely correct. Depending on what you mean there by appliance, because that's a word that I've been thinking about. A Civic is an appliance, in my opinion. It's not. I know where I was going with it. I will get back to it. Let's say a Dodge Neon, or most modern cars. They're an appliance. It's a box that's practical, has a practical function. Yeah, maybe it's got like some trim on it that makes it look good. It's got a little chrome or whatever, but it's not a thing. Like I've talked about in some of my posts, a thing is like, this is a thing. This is a mechanical thing that we can interact with, that has a human touch to it. And this is a Seiko. This is not a haute horology. But some of these things, and you can get them relatively affordably too, or not more expensive than this, but you don't have to spend a fortune to get some of these, or maybe a vintage timepiece that is handmade, and they are absolutely amazing. So where I was going earlier, though, is that it doesn't have to be super expensive, in the sense that my first car was a Volkswagen Bug. 1972 was kind of an interim year between the Super Beetle and the regular Beetle and the Super Beetle. It had some Super Beetle parts. Anyway, it had the flat windscreen, like really close to your face. And that was not an expensive car when it was made. It was not expensive when I bought it. I got it for $1,000 when I was like 17. And I drove that thing forever. Even rebuilt it after it caught on fire. But it had a soul. I remember when it did catch on fire and the firemen were trying to, I saw this guy, he did the back swing with his axe to knock in the back window because he couldn't figure out how to open the door. And I was like, no. Here, I'll open the door for you. Because it meant something. You wouldn't do that with a Dodge Neon. Sorry. You'd be looking for the insurance money. Okay. But then, of course, a Volkswagen doesn't have as much character, let's say, as a Ferrari 250 GTO. They have even more. Charles says, I was going to say, you sound like someone that would love a Janus. Yes, I think you're talking to Jim, I guess. I don't know. Eric Fritz, mechanical watches or a Janus motorcycle have soul. Amen. Confed Yank says, then again, as commonly my friends say in quote, cars move the body, trucks move the world, and motorcycles move the soul. Huh. Interesting. Wonder what watches do. What do they move? They don't move time. The first complication is a date wheel. Yep, I can see that. I'm moving around now. Then again, as commonly my friends say, Jim says, just saw the new Janus ad in the Haggerty Drivers Club magazine. Nicely done. Yeah, I just was looking at it today too, but I don't have it here. If you subscribe to Haggerty magazine, and this is the Drivers magazine, I guess, We have a really great full-page ad in it that Grant did the copy for. It's really good, and it talks a lot about what we're talking about right now. First complication is the date wheel. Yep. Jacob says, imagine like a bell that rotates around a... Oh, you're talking about the rotary. Yes. Let me scroll back to that comment just so I remember. I have a 20s Lux rotary clock that still keeps great time. It's fun to watch work. Jacob says, imagine like a bell that rotates around a housing with a needle that points at a ribbon. That ribbon is numbered. And as the needle points at the rotation ribbon, it tells you what time it is. We got to look this up. Let's look it up. Where is my... There we go. What's it called? Rotary... Lux rotary clock. All right, let's see here. Oh, interesting. Look at that. There you go. Can y'all see that? I'll move the... Very neat. Tape measure. It does look like a tape measure. Huh. And you say it does keep good time. That's really neat. Okay. Confed Yank says, having a separate second hand is such... I think so. I'm not sure what that means. Jacob Will, it's obnoxiously loud. Yes. Vinyl is better than digital music. Fountain pen and rollerball. There's got to be a kind of a connection here because I love vinyl records, and every day I've had the same fountain pen. And anybody, if you ask any of the Janus folks, I have a Lamy fountain pen that I've actually got at home right now because I was drawing with it. That just fascinates me. And yes, again, I have one of the ones that you can, it has a little crank on the back, and you can refill from the inkwell your, the reservoir, I don't know what you call it on a pen. Anyway, you can refill the pen. And over the years, I have had a lot of fountain pens, like actual quill pens, I guess. And when I was in architecture school, we studied watercolor rendering, and we used ruling pens. So all those things absolutely fascinate me, and they are things, not devices or appliances. They do capture they captivate you and inspire you, especially when you can use them to do work. And guess what? The work that you do is never as efficient or practical as if you use a computer to do it or you use a ballpoint pen. It's way more practical and efficient and fast and all those things, but it's not as worthwhile, in my opinion. I'm a firm believer in things like hand drafting, but you're never going to win that argument when it comes to a practical argument with somebody. At least I don't think so. I think that to try to do so is wrong. It's not going to be more efficient. But to determine something's value based on its efficiency is a mistake. You're missing the point, which is the really the answer I would give to anybody who's trying to say that, well, you shouldn't ever do CAD drafting or hand drafting because it's not as efficient. Well, yeah, I mean, I most of the time use a computer, unfortunately, but I don't have time. But when something is an elevated task, like some of the architectural designs I've done, working on one now for our church, I watercolor rendered it. I hand drafted the whole thing. And it elevates the whole thing to another level. It inspires people. It's inspired us to raise funds. It's worthy of greater things. And I think that keeping time on your wrist is worthy of something that like this, that is, it has more significance and purpose than than an Apple Watch. I mean, come on, that's like the Apple Watch you have on your wrist. I mean, it's like it's nothing. It's more accurate than the first space missions computers, and probably capable of computing more than they could. So, Confed Yank says, let's see, a mechanical pocket watch vinyl. Is there a commoncy of everyone here? Yeah. Tell us, what other things do you do that don't make sense? Multifarious says, Confed Yank, I mean, we get the Janus ethos, right? Yeah, I hope so. Everybody does. You got a Janus. Seth says, the cost is commensurate to the effort. Better isn't the point, a priori. Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was just saying, you can't say it's more efficient, but I do think that there are, on some levels, you can say it's better. Maybe I'm missing something there. We can go back and forth on that. But better can mean a lot of things. Efficient doesn't. Efficient misses the point, or convenient, or whatever. But I think you're right there. The cost is commensurate to the effort. And I think that's a really interesting question. There's a guy, a friend of mine, who is a plasterer, a traditional craftsman who does plaster work. One of these days, I've actually been thinking about having him on the podcast, because I think he and I have had some interesting interchanges, and he's written some wonderful things about craftsmanship. And as a tradition, he does traditional plaster work. We're talking like Moorish designs, classical detailing, stained plaster, all this really traditional. He can do the molds that do all the different cornices and pediments. Really a highly skilled craft. And I don't know if he actually said this. I need to ask him, but he said at one time that the thing about an object which is the product of someone's hands is that it is I'm going to forget the quote now. It is an expression of human, I'm going to mess it up now, but something to the effect of human concentration. And the fact that it's like distilled human effort and concentration and meaning actually makes that thing have more value. And when you walk up to it, you can tell that this thing was made by hand, even if it's like essentially identical, and there's a machine-made one and a handcrafted one. There is actually a difference between those two things. And it probably has something to do with its imperfection. Right? Which is mind-blowing. The fact that it isn't perfect is actually what makes it better. And it probably took 50 times longer than the machine-made one. So you can draw your own conclusions from that. What I think about it. Confetti Yank says multifarious, exactly, yeah. Referring to the, we get the Janus ethos. Confetti Yank says, I would have a full anxiety attack if firemen would smash out windows in my 1970s Ford Limited. Yes, exactly. Like, no. It may be on fire, but I'm going to fix it, so don't knock the window out. Let's see. Confetti Yank says, clock watches move our plans. Ooh, I like it. Ooh, nice. They move our plans because our plans are not permanent, and they never will be. We can make plans, but they won't necessarily be kept. I like that a lot. Seth says, I have a watch head for you. It was expensive at one point, but is parts now. Reach out after the podcast, and I'll send it to you. Perfect for disassembly. Oh, no kidding, dude. That would be awesome. I would love that. That's very generous. Very, very cool. Confetti Yank says, but in same, I'd rather have a clock for my car restored instead of replacing it with new. Yep. My daily car is a 1970s Ford LTD. My daily motorbike is a 100th anniversary HD Road King, vinyl stacked with only 2 to 3 working players. I go tent camping. You sound like a man after my own heart. If only I had the money to afford a 1970s Ford. My problem with all these hobbies and not hobbies. Hobbies is a pejorative. These pursuits of higher things. How about that? Is that I don't have enough money to do them. I've got to sell more motorcycles. Confeds Yank says, I also like wearing Victorian trousers. Yes. All right, watch out now. What are you going to say next? And vest. So, of course, pocket watch. All right, I can get behind that. And I must have cargo space for my cowboy hat. Nice. Seth says, take a hand-pounded aluminum car body versus stamped, think 40s, 50s Porsche or Ferrari. There's just no substitute for seeing the hammer marks. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And I think that the thing we get into with that is, I think I mentioned it last week, but I was on a podcast. It was like a live stream with 2 architects and talking about architecture, but I was kind of bouncing back and forth between architecture and motorcycles. And we were talking about some of these similar topics, idea of modern architecture and traditional architecture. And then they brought up the idea of, what was the word they used? Vernacular. And I don't know, my father knows more about vernacular than I do, but the vernacular, I was kind of riffing on it, and I was like, well, maybe the vernacular, if there is a vernacular about Janus motorcycles, because in architecture, the vernacular is like, if you're in North Carolina, Confed Yank, for example, or Seth, I think you're in North Carolina, or if you're in Kentucky or Virginia, or anywhere, there is a local way of building that isn't necessarily a style. It's the way that the craftsmen in your area build a building. And that's one way of describing vernacular. In vernacular, the word actually means like it's the local dialect. So even though we all speak the same language, there will be vernacular expressions that may be not familiar to other people in one area or another. And those are of eminent value today. I think they're going the way of the dodo at this point, but I'm going somewhere with this. Seth, the hand hammering, the signs of imperfection in a thing. Let's take, for example, the Halcyon fuel tank. The Halcyon fuel tank originally was hand hammered. It is aluminum. It's now formed on a press, but it's done by hand completely. You've probably seen videos of how it's done. It's a wonderful process. But the reason it's shaped the way it is, and this is where I'm going to go with this, is not because we thought, hey, we want to have this weird flat fish mouth on the front of our fuel tank. That actually was the last thing I would have wanted if I were going in this like blank slate. But we didn't have the ability we didn't have a giant press that could make the shape of a tank, or the ability to English wheel every single one. You know, given even our small scale, we weren't able to do that, and we didn't have the skill to do it, to be honest. So we used what was available to us, which is breaking it in a two-way bend, and then that made us have to do it this way and put this thing on the front and put this V brake on the top, and then after the first couple of bikes, I'm like, oh, I knew I liked it, but then after the first couple of bikes, I'm like, holy moly, this is really something. And as we kind of refined it more and figured it out, I was like, okay, this is better than anything I could have designed from scratch because we were forced to do it that way. And I wonder if that isn't a kind of a similar expression of you look at that tank and you know that tank is not made by a machine. And it wasn't designed on a machine. It was designed by hand. So anyway. Confed says vernacular / slang / terminology. Yeah, that's one way of talking about the vernacular. It would be like a local slang or vocabulary that's local. Yes, also local dialect. Seth says, I believe that the sweat equity is a currency. My effort has value, just like your simple but hand welded frames. Yes, I think we're 100% on the same page there. But it's hard to make a justification for something being better just because it's made by hand, especially if the two. I don't know of an example, but let's assume that you can make two things that were, one of them is made by a machine and one of them is made by hand. One of them took 30 seconds, the other one took an hour and a half. You hand copied a drawing and the other one, somebody Xeroxed it. It can be hard to make a justification for this one is $250 and this one is 30 cents. Right? And yeah, it's also hard to justify like hiring a guy who plasters using traditional methods or design a building. It's impossible. Let's say you are an architect. I've been in this situation. I want to design. We're going to design this residence in Williamsburg, Virginia. Let's look at an actual example. I want to hand draft this thing. And you look at it, you can't even justify it yourself because it's going to take you 4 times as long, and the client's going to pay you the same amount if you do it one way or the other. So it's a hard balance, and that's where technology, the essence of technology, I think, or the end result is that it makes efficiency the only gauge of value, and once it makes efficiency the only gauge of value, it controls you because you can't go against it. You cannot say, oh, I'm going to draw this by hand instead of using the CAD program, or I'm going to blah, blah, blah. You can't do it anymore. Oh, I'm not going to get an Apple Watch I've tried this. I'm not going to get a smartphone because I don't believe in that. I'm going to use a blah, blah, blah. You can't do it. Believe me. I mean, you can, but you just zero yourself out of society when you do it. It's like technological suicide. So it doesn't work. So all that to say, the motorcycle, well, it's already after 8. We got to wrap this up. The motorcycle is the one example that I've been able to find other than these things. And I'm sure there's some other things out there. They're nice cars, but in general, as a whole, timepieces, mechanical timepieces, and motorcycles seem to me like let's just say one of or two of a very small subset of technological products that serve our humanity rather than demanding that we serve them. So I need to write more about this and think about it more, but yes, I don't want to lose track of time on it. There you go. So I think with that, I will call this an evening. I gotta go to a demolition derby and see some cars smashed. It's an ultimate display of Luddite destruction of technology. How about that? There we go. Smash those textile mills. Okay, look at the comments. Form follows function at times. Yep. Seth says, doesn't have to be better. The sweat equity is the justification. If you get it, you get it. If you don't buy a Janus. That's true. And maybe I'm wrong and that there isn't anything better about it. But I have this gut feeling that we would be better off as humans if we did more of this stuff and were engaged more with things that took sweat equity and manual labor, or not just manual labor, but handwork, craftsmanship, Jim Winters from Louis Sullivan, who's worked in the Janus area. From Louis Sullivan. I know Louis Sullivan, the architect. Confetti says, yes, don't lose track of time. Eric Fritz says, well said, Richard. Don't forget earplugs. Yes, actually, I have my earplugs in my pocket. They're from motorcycling, but I'll bring them. Seth, better off deep end of the pool. Yeah. Okay. Well, fellas, and if there are any ladies on, it's been wonderful to hang out with y'all and sip on these beverages. I look forward to doing this again next week, and let me know if you have any more suggestions for topics. We'll be digging more into this stuff. I have a feeling this will not be the last time I talk about timekeeping and mechanical watches. Again, thank you, and I will catch you all next week. Goodbye.